Good morning, Indiana. Welcome to Who's Left This Week, the unapologetically progressive Sunday morning show for the Hoosier State. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers, and I am broadcasting from Bloomington. I want to say great show that we're about to have this week, but it is a heavy show we're about to have here this week. Got some good friends and a new friend to talk about it with us. We'll bring them in shortly. But first, a little housekeeping. I do ask that you subscribe to us at Who's Left over on the new Progressive Indiana Network. That is at progressiveindiana.net. And please, if you would, follow PIN on all the social media channels. We are at Progressive Indiana Network, fully spelled out on most of them, over on Blue Sky and TikTok. It is PIN Indiana. And you can find me personally at Who's Left. HOOS left on most of your social media sites. All right, enough shameless self-promotion. It is not the week for it. Let's welcome in our guest today. First, back to the show, our good friend, returning guest, Chuck Gill. Chuck, welcome to the show.
Hey, Scott. Thanks for having me on this morning.
Glad to have you here. Good to get some perspective, I think, from a veteran on some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today. So I really appreciate you taking your Sunday morning and being with us here today.
No problem. Appreciate it.
So also welcoming back to the show. She was here last week. She's been with us a lot lately, and I'm glad to see her every time she joins us. There is Tabitha Ziegler. Tabitha, welcome back.
Hi, guys.
Heavy stuff this week, Tab.
Yeah, it just seems like it's getting heavier and heavier, but we're here for it, right?
Yeah, well, the only way out is through. Yeah,
right.
And welcome our new friend to the show, fresh blood, the voice of the youth. It's Upland Sandy, Ivan Sandstrom. Ivan, welcome.
Scott, Chuck, Tabitha, good morning. Hello.
Morning.
Really glad to have you here. Welcome. Thanks for doing this. Hope to see a lot more of you here in the coming months. I really think you bring a unique perspective, and you're very well versed on what you talk about. Follow this kid over on social media at Upland Sandy. So let's go ahead and get into it. There's a lot this week and not any time to waste. So there we go. This time last week, we were still sort of processing the fallout of U.S. forces kidnapping Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in the middle of the night. So this week, we're sort of seeing how things are shaking out. And Maduro is gone, but his regime is essentially still intact. They cut off the head of the snake, but the snake is still there. So led by his vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, who Trump asserted would remain in place if she, quote, does what we want, and threatened she would pay a very big price, probably bigger than Maduro, if she does not. Well, she is still there in charge. She's a Chavista. She is Maduro's vice president. Still, the Maduro regime without Maduro remains in place. Now, information at this point suggests that Maduro's allies, like Rodriguez, struck a deal with the Trump administration to give up Maduro in exchange for staying in power. Now, Trump says opposition leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Corina Machado does not have the respect of the country. Well, maybe. But it appears the real reason Trump doesn't want Machado to assume power in Venezuela is because she had the temerity to accept the Nobel Peace Prize from the committee and not hand it to him. This is from the Grio. Now, according to the Washington Post, the Trump White House views Machado's decision to accept the Nobel Peace Prize rather than declaring that Trump deserved it more as an ultimate sin. Perhaps recognizing Trump's very public campaign for the award, Machado dedicated her Nobel Peace Prize to Trump for his decisive support for our cause. Now, Monday, speaking with Sean Hannity on Fox News, this from the New York Times, Machado said that presenting the prize to Trump would be an act of gratitude from the Venezuelan people for the removal of Nicolas Maduro, the country's president, who was captured last week by the United States. On Friday, however, the Norwegian Nobel Institute clarified the rules governing the award, writing that the facts were clear and well established. Quote, once a Nobel Prize is announced, it cannot be revoked, shared, or transferred to others. The decision is final and stands for all time, end quote. So, Chuck, isn't that the pettiest shit you've ever heard?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, it's funny. Well, not funny. It's sad, but it's like every time you think you see the bottom of the barrel with these folks, he excels in finding the new bottom. However that occurs. I mean, bowling over another country, which is completely illegal. We have no justification to do so. And the fact that I think it's hilarious that he points in that somebody doesn't have the respect of the people when he has a approval rating that is worse than just about any president, including himself on his first term. So, I mean, I don't know where that really runs.
Yeah, you make a good point. Now, Tabitha, like, I guess Machado is not the. This is not black and white, right? There's a lot of nuance in this situation. I mean, Machado is very, in many ways, a right-wing figure, and has the support of big capital, big oil, who wants somebody like her to get in there, instead of a self-proclaimed socialist like Maduro, like Rodriguez. I don't know. Do they? I hate to give them any credit whatsoever, but does the Trump administration maybe have a point in that the best thing for right now is continuity in Venezuela?
Let's see if my memory serves me well. So his sitting vice president was recently in Russia, right? And then you got Machado, who is elsewhere. And depending on which journalist you ask, who may actually be doing their journalistic duty, may have dug up some dirt on her as well. Venezuela seems just like a melting pot of controversy. And then the Nobel Peace Prize potential giving it away is just like the cherry on top of, I don't know, it just seems like a massive grift to me.
Ivan, I've mentioned this before. The man, Trump, obviously covets this Nobel Peace Prize, probably because Obama has one, and you can debate whether or not Obama deserved that before he ever assumed the presidency, and what he did during his presidency in terms of like drone strikes. But like, what if we just made up a Nobel Peace Prize and gave it to him if he would go away?
Well, I mean, that's part of the idea, the FIFA Peace Prize, right? It's really seems like you can dangle some keys in front of him, and he'll completely forget his train of thought and just latch on to this idea. And I think a lot of what has happened in Venezuela is probably attributable to that. We know that Marco Rubio it's been his dream ever since he was a little senator from Florida to overthrow the regime in Cuba. And it seems like something of an ideological commitment from a lot of that, expatriated or the, descendants of expats from Cuba and Venezuela to overthrow these leftist governments. And I mean, you can say it's about oil, but then this might be the first time that we've done an intervention where it being about oil is actually the cover story, and it's not about oil, because Chevron and these other, American oil companies are saying all of this investment, all of this planning, the logistics, this wasn't in consult with us for a long time. The prices of oil are low, so digging or drilling more oil doesn't seem to be their smart business strategy. So I would imagine Marco Rubio and that hawkish lobby just dangled some keys and said, hey, you can get maybe the Nobel Peace Prize. Everybody will say, wow, you saved Venezuela, and that sounds nice to him.
Yeah, and about the oil. So, Trump had a bunch of oil executives to the White House earlier this week. He said he's seeking $100 billion in oil industry investment in Venezuela. Now the chief executive of Exxon, Darren Woods, said, quote, We have had our assets seized there twice, and so you can imagine to re-enter a third time would require some pretty significant changes from what we've historically seen and what is currently the state, calling the country, quote, uninvestable. Now, the story they paint about having their assets confiscated is a bit of a stretch, but I don't want to get into that. You can dig into it. I've got a good fact check from Snopes in the show notes over at progressiveindiana.net if you subscribe over there. And like you were saying, Evan, it would require a lot of investment. The Venezuelan oil is just not that good. It is heavy, dirty, sulfuric crude. It's highly polluting, and it takes a lot of energy to refine and process. And it is not a good investment in the short term for some of these countries. So let us talk about, and Ivan, you mentioned Rubio and Cuba, and what we've seen this week is an escalation of rhetoric from folks within the administration, forwarding something they're calling, and I cannot make this up. I can't even say it with a straight face. They call it the Don Roe Doctrine, right? Now, this obviously is a reference to the Monroe Doctrine, dating to 1823, when the fifth president of the United States, James Monroe, basically declared that the Americas, the Western Hemisphere, was a no-go zone for European colonial powers. Now, I remember growing up as a kid, we were taught this was, America standing up for democracy and against colonialism, but in effect, this has been used to justify U.S. intervention in Latin America for, the last 150 years at least. The State Department, of all places, the people who are supposed to be diplomats, posted a meme on X on Monday that said, "This is our hemisphere," seeming to declare ownership. Now, Ivan, you mentioned Cuba. So the Trump team has put a target on Cuba. 32 Cuban security personnel were among those killed during the operation that captured Maduro. From the Washington Post, quote, "To keep the lights on and cars running, Cuba has long been dependent on Venezuelan oil supplies, for which it has exchanged security and medical personnel in a sympathetic contract with leftist allies in Caracas." Secretary of State Marco Rubio told Meet the Press last Sunday, he says, in a very mobster-like fashion, "I'm not going to talk to you about what our future steps are going to be, but if I lived in Havana and I was in the government, I'd be concerned." And of course, it doesn't stop with Cuba. Trump and his administration are also ramping up rhetoric on Greenland. Greenland! This is a self-governing or a semi-autonomous territory of Denmark, a NATO member, an ally. And Trump said late this week, quote, "We're going to do something to Greenland, whether they like it or not, because if we don't do it, Russia or China will take over Greenland, and we're not going to have Russia or China as a neighbor." Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt said Trump could use the military, again, against an ally. Meanwhile, our European allies issued a joint statement defending the Danish territory's sovereignty. And it should be noted, the U.S. already has a military presence on the island. Chuck, Venezuela, Cuba, Greenland, the parallels to the Sudetenland, Austria, Poland. Am I the only one that's seeing these? Am I out of line here?
No, you're right on the nose, and this to me, this is just furthering a idea to not only like claim to the Western Hemisphere, but also to break down NATO's effectiveness in general. Because one way or the other, if this keeps going the way it is, NATO's going to say, "All right, U.S., you're out of the deal, and then we will be completely on our own." And that actually speaks well to what it would favor Russia and China and all these other bad state actors that, Putin would be absolutely ecstatic to see us out of NATO. I mean, that's been one of his main marching concepts for a long time. And I would say from a military standpoint, if I was in this scenario, I would be like, what the F are we doing? I mean, this does not make any cohesive sense whatsoever, because one of the arguments he makes, we don't want Russia bordering the U.S. Hi, do you know that Alaska is not, like next door? I'm just putting it out there. So the argument doesn't make any sense. And to me, I think it is a joint thing of trying to withdraw us out of NATO in one way or another, and end up, you know, doing this dictatorial takeover of anything that they can lay their hands on. But from the peace president, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense.
No, it doesn't. And Tabitha, are you familiar with a gentleman named Alexander Dugin? Alexander Dugin is a Russian philosopher. Folks often call him the brain of Putin. And if you read a book called Geopolitics, I don't know if there's an English translation. I take my I take this from other folks. I've not read it myself. But a book from, I want to say, 1996 called Geopolitics basically gives a step-by-step explanation of how to destroy the West, how to destroy the United States, and break it apart, set it upon itself, and basically balkanize us the way we balkanized the former Soviet Union. And boy, like it is going to a T.
Well, the fact that we do a really good job, or that we have for the last 40 or 50 years, trying to do everything we could to not educate our public and make sure that they have no sense of civics. Man, anybody that's been paying attention could see this happening for a while now, but this is just accelerating. Greenland really concerns me, not just for the military reasons, but for the civilian population there. I mean, nobody's having a conversation about what the Greenlanders want. And anybody that is paying attention to what they are doing on the ground is very clear that they don't want to be a part of the U.S. And why would they? I mean, being a part of Denmark, they have access to the healthcare system, like they've got maternity and paternity leave, like elder care. They've got European care. They have no interest in coming over to ours, especially whenever we're cutting healthcare for people. Not to mention that we send someone from Louisiana, of all places, to, talk with the Greenlanders and represent the U.S. Like, why didn't we send one of the many indigenous senators that we have to go and speak to a very large indigenous population, at the very least, besides all of the other things that are going on? I just think that this is just imperialism at its finest. There's nothing new about this. They're just, slapping some social media campaigns on it, and they're like, yippee, look what we're going to do to Greenland. And they're trying to do the big hurrah about it, like they did with Vietnam. And
Yeah.
this isn't that. Like, it's not that at all.
Well, yeah, you can debate whether any of that was a good idea, but I've not seen naked imperialism like this from us before. At least, if you go back to the Bush administration in Iraq, they had the decency to lie to us about what they were doing.
Yeah, I mean, they got someone who they thought was one of the more trustworthy figures in American, military life, Colin Powell, to dangle a little vial in front of the UN, and that was how they tried to sell it to us. We also used to, fund a coup, maybe ship in a bunch of weapons and train a bunch of locals on, how to do a revolution. We used to have a little bit of finesse to it, but. Yeah, it's quite naked. I think you said it really well. But also this whole idea that we've got our hemisphere to dominate, and our position at the same time is that Taiwan, right across the South China Sea, that the Strait of Taiwan from mainland China, that it's our position that the Chinese should have no influence or control over the South China Sea right in their own backyard. And we're also funding proxy conflict in Ukraine right in the backyard of Russia. We've got this sort of philosophy that all of these other power centers on the globe are not allowed to have any control or any domination over their sphere of influence, but actually we need dominance over your sphere of influence. But then one of the great crimes of the Maduro regime is that Iran and China and Russia are getting influence in Venezuela when we've banned Venezuela from doing any kind of business, selling any kind of oil to anybody else, which makes the price dirt cheap. And we're worried about Russia and China, technologically eclipsing us, especially China with AI, and you need electricity in order to fund all this AI stuff. They're getting all this oil that we've made dirt cheap, that we've banned them from selling on the market. So it's really a self-licking ice cream cone where our own policy creates the own justification and exigency to do more of our own terrible policy.
Oh man, it sounds like it's almost on purpose. So hey, I mentioned the Bush administration having the decency to lie to us about Iraq. Well, and the Trump administration is at least being nakedly truthful about their imperialism now. One thing they are not being truthful about is January 6th, 2021. We I guess celebrated is the wrong word, but marked the 5th anniversary this year. And the White House marked the occasion by gaslighting the American people. So, from the New York Times, quote, on the 5th anniversary of the pro-Trump mob attack on the Capitol, the Trump administration created a new page on the official White House website that represented the president's most brazen bid yet to rewrite the history of the January 6th riot with false claims aimed at absolving him of responsibility. So on this webpage, they identify by name members of the mob who died during or in connection with the assault. This is an attempt to create martyrs. It does not mention, however, the nearly 140 police officers who were injured on that day, nor those who died in its aftermath. It accuses Capitol Police of instigating the violence. Back the blue, huh? It blames Mike Pence for certifying a quote-unquote stolen election. It accuses Democrats of creating a narrative to certify a fraud-ridden election and persecute innocent Americans. It asserts Trump called for a peaceful protest while ignoring his whole "be there, will be wild" tweet in the weeks leading up to the event. It fails to mention the involvement of extremist groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, and it blames the Biden DOJ for taking political prisoners, they say, without mentioning that the arrests and the investigations began before Trump even left office. So, Chuck, what are they doing here? What's going on?
Well, I mean, you hit it right on the nose. I mean, it's a rewrite of history. I mean, it's like don't believe what your eyes and ears tell you, what you saw happen during those events. You'll believe what we're telling you. I mean, this is a recurrent theme that's going through this administration, and we saw it very recently what happened with the shooting in Minnesota. But to me, I struggle with this in a lot of ways, because to me it's almost like trying to rewrite 9/11. And I was active duty when it occurred, and knowing what I went through during those events, and then if I were to, somebody rewriting those, that history of what actually transpired and what we actually did, or those type of things, the folks that were involved in this, they're being almost, they're being gaslighted and framed in lights that aren't true. I don't know how. I mean, I would be enraged, to say the least. And I'm enraged as an American, because I mean, this is not who we are as a people. I mean, this is not the America that most of us would recognize or wish for. And unfortunately, unless it is challenged outright and direct, which I have to give NPR a lot of credit, they put together a very great series on the actual events of of January 6th and all that. So it's just we've got to keep history alive. And Tabitha hit it earlier. It's the breakdown of education, because they're doing all this, and even on the website where it talks about historical battles, where they've done these AI reenactments or animations of history, I guess, is maybe however you want to frame it. I mean, it's just, I mean, it's blatant propaganda indoctrination, essentially, for more or less, and it's dangerous. Just entirely.
Tabitha, I mentioned to Chuck earlier in context of this whole Don Road doctrine crap. I compared Venezuela, Cuba, and Greenland to Czechoslovakia, Austria, and Poland, right, in the 30s, and the way the Germans then asserted dominance over their, quote unquote, sphere of influence. Well, something else, the Nazis, first thing they did when they took power was to stage a precipitating event for which they could declare martial law. It's called the Reichstag fire. And then they blamed communists for it, right? I don't know if we ever will know the truth of that event, but it's widely believed that the Nazis started the fire themselves and then blamed it on the communists. This looks to me like our Schittler here rewriting history as pretext for doing something worse.
Well, I may be a little different than some other people, but I say always follow the money. And some things have come to light recently that I think speak volumes. So if you're good at putting puzzle pieces together, or if your brain works that way, I would encourage you to do some extra research. There is a lady online called the Manhattan Madam that has come forward with a bunch of information that essentially says Turning Point USA funded January 6th. So of the $650,000, I think it was, $450,000 of it was provided by Turning Point, which Charlie Kirk and Erica Kirk were a part of. Charlie's not here to speak for himself anymore, obviously, but Erica's sure making her rounds still. And I would say people like that we need to pay attention to, because, she just recently gave I think it was the Indian ambassador. She had helped inaugurate the Indian ambassador, and it was one of her friends. It's a really weird story for someone that has so much access to the White House, and some of these other people that have a lot of access to the White House. I don't know. Like, a lot of people died. A lot of people got hurt on January 6th. But I think there are a lot of people that don't care about that and were highly motivated to bring in people that they wanted to install in our government to help grift. There's a lot of stuff going on there that there might be some truth to. It's worth looking into. I would say follow the money.
It certainly seems like the establishment of this country, the wealth class, is perfectly willing to go along with this gaslighting that Tabitha is suggesting.
Yeah, I think I've got my algorithms, my news diet actually centers a decent bit of right-wing, intra-right-wing, like inside echo chamber discourse. And they're actually having some degree of, mostly on the fringes, but having some degree of skepticism about Erica Kirk too. In the wake of the assassination, how she stepped up into a really public role and like an executive role at Turning Point. She like hosted a documentary that was produced by the CIA about if an EMP attack hit America. And so it's at least very clear that she's been some sort of, I don't know if operative is the right word, but connected into intelligence and kind of a deeper level of the American establishment. I wouldn't want to say anything definitive, but I think there's a wide degree of skepticism from across the aisle about her. And I think I also take, I guess, a bigger view on January 6th, obviously, like in the micro, like it's an attack on American democracy, on anything that we claim to hold dear, all of these conventions and traditions of the peaceful transfer of power. All of that said, I find it very interesting that the federal law enforcement protection at this is not an indictment of obviously of any officer or anybody who was there defending the Capitol, but on a more logistical basis, it seems like there were some shortfalls that can be attributed to incompetence, but sometimes you got to see how did this precipitating event that further puts America into two separate information spheres that don't communicate with each other. You've got Trump and his administration signaling to their people, here's this, completely revisionist way of viewing this, while you've got another half of the country that says, oh my God, are you telling me to believe my lying eyes? And it's looking like another half of the country is believing their lying eyes, or is rejecting their lying eyes. That's to me the more insidious part, is that the further and further we drift into having these completely fundamental and incompatible understandings of recent history, the harder and harder they make it for us to rally around things we all agree on, like economic justice, like getting corporate power out of our elections. I think these are things that 99% of people agree on. But then as soon as you start talking about somebody who you feel is this cultural icon that's fighting for you in the sphere of the culture, versus this is somebody who's I've got my identity opposing, and for righteous reasons. But I think that's the further insidious part 5 years down the line of January 6th, is that it's made it so that we are just not able to talk to each other, even more than we were 5 years ago.
Yeah, and we're about to see another example of that here. So I want to talk about what I think we would probably all agree was the most important story this week, and we're going to go to Minnesota. And let me set this up a little bit. So the Trump administration has been targeting Minnesota and other blue states, but especially Minnesota at the moment, withholding social safety net money from 5 states over trumped up fraud concerns. It was California, Colorado, Illinois, New York, and of course, Minnesota. These targeted programs include child care subsidies for low-income household, TANF assistance for diapers and clothing, and social services block grants. Now, that was on Tuesday. They announced this policy. On Friday, a federal judge did block the administration's efforts to withhold these funds. The Biden appointee not ruling on the legality of the freeze, but did say the 5 states met the threshold to at least protect the status quo while arguments are made in the court. Now, the administration got a metaphorical scalp in Governor Tim Walz, dropping out of his race for re-election as governor of Minnesota. Republicans sought to tie Walz to this child care fraud case, with some right-wing provocateurs suggesting Walz is personally involved despite zero evidence. Walz says, quote, "Every minute I spend defending my own political interests would be a minute I can't spend defending the people of Minnesota against the criminals who prey on our generosity and the cynics who prey on our differences." He said that on Monday. But they claimed a metaphorical scalp in Walz. They actually killed somebody on Wednesday. On Wednesday, an ICE agent, later identified as Jonathan Ross, shot and killed 37-year-old poet and mother of 3 Renee Nicole Good during an encounter. Agents gave Good conflicting orders, one telling her to leave while another told her to get out of her vehicle. Footage shows Good attempting to speed away, swerving to avoid Ross, who positioned himself in front of her SUV contrary to his training. The agent fired 3 shots, at least 2 of which came after the vehicle had passed him, hitting the victim at close range, causing her to lose control of the vehicle. To add insult to this horrific event, a doctor at the scene was blocked from helping the victim. A man was heard on a social media video that was captured saying, "I am a physician." He asked to give aid. An ICE agent said, "I don't care." It took EMS 15 minutes to arrive, and they were blocked from getting their ambulance to the scene. They had to carry her away on foot. And I want to ask you there. I'm going to pause there before we talk about the fallout. Chuck, just your initial reactions to what you saw on that day.
I'm not sure I have a strong enough word to classify it, but I guess the best I could do is horrified. Um, the fact that if any shooting, any loss of life is obviously a tragedy. In some of these cases, we've kind of thought because we have these untrained people that are out there, this guy can't claim that. He is a vet. He's been around the game long enough. He's been a law enforcement officer. He's done all these things. There was no need to withdraw his weapon. I know from my military experience, there are rules of engagement. There are rules for the use of deadly force. There are very strict guidelines on when you can and when you cannot do that, especially on the federal side. And that guy didn't even care. He was just outright threw weapon first and didn't even bother to ask questions later. In fact, saying what he did after the shooting, I'm not going to repeat the statement because it's just,
Yeah.
I can't. But just the blatant. I don't care that I just did that. In fact, don't I feel like a big bad boy for exercising, pulling out my measuring stick, so to say. And it's horrific. I mean, no civilian should be in that kind of in that space like that. I mean, because it's going to further erode uh, any faith that's left in our institutions, which again, as per norm for what has been going on over this last year, that is, I think, kind of the case because again, they're overwhelming the situation, and this killing is just one example. And then there was another one, Keith Porter, out in California, that unfortunately hasn't really gotten a whole lot of visual traffic thus far, but it same thing. Off-duty federal law enforcement officer decides to draw a weapon and ask, don't even ask questions, just fire first and think later. That is not responsible gun ownership. That's not responsible firearms training. We went through so much to learn that you can only do this in these circumstances. And in fact, the DOJ has a directive from 2014 that says, "Thou shalt not do this unless thou is in this place." You don't get much more clear than that. So there is no spin to this, and the fallout reaction saying she was a domestic terrorist or she was, this, that, and the other thing is all complete. And I'll use the mayor of Minnesota's words, bullshit. I mean, it is a complete bullshit.
Tabitha, this guy, I guess, has had run-ins before. Like this summer, apparently, he got dragged trying to reach into somebody's car and drag him out of a car. Like this guy is a loose cannon. I think he wanted this. He's been looking for an excuse to do this, in my opinion. Well, how about you? What do you think?
I think there are those of us that think the country changed after January 6th and it just accelerated. And there's been an anger that has been brewing. And for those people that are like Proud Boys and all these sorts of characters, right? This was the perfect opportunity to really unleash some hate into their sphere. And I don't think he's alone. I don't think this is clearly not a one off. Now we're using deadly force. This isn't a war zone from what I can tell, even though it would seem that way. We have different rules of engagement. I reached out to a couple friends of mine that are police officers and just asked them for clarity. They sent me to the DHS website itself. It's very clear on there, what to do when you feel the need to use deadly force. And on top of that, there were other officers there, and they had an obligation if they felt that he was a loose cannon to report him. So clearly they've had opportunities to report this man in particular. But this just seems to be the playbook. So then you have to ask yourself, right, like, who is giving the direction for them to be so deadly, right? Because now you're talking about American citizens. They've killed other people. They've done some horrendous things. It seems to be more palatable to the American public as long as they're brown or black. So this one was the first white woman. I think that struck a chord particularly because it makes certain people feel a little less safe than they thought they were. And I really do not like how Fox News approached this, just really dehumanizing this woman and, you know, sort of lining the stack of things that the right hates to dehumanize her in a way to make this acceptable. And it's just disgusting. Personally, I feel like, the First Amendment is there to protect all of us, even the assholes. So I'd be saying the same thing. Like, if ICE had murdered a white MAGA guy, I would be saying the exact same thing I'm saying now. This is for everyone. And once we cross that line, we can't go back. So now we have to decide what we're going to do with these people, because they've shown that they're not contributing in any positive sense to any sort of order in our society. But technically, we do have police officers that don't wear masks that could step forward and start to police their areas, even if that means going against ICE themselves.
Ivan, Tabitha mentioned the racial dynamic here. Like shooting at somebody as they're driving away is definitely something police have done to black and brown folks in this country for entirely too long. And one case is too many. But does it take something like this to wake up your average wine mom who hasn't been paying attention?
I mean, yeah, I think it does. But I think on that note of how kind of the reaction and how this is digested by the American public, I reminded of earlier this week. I went to I guess that would have been last week. I went to a car repair place to get them to look at my truck, and they had on the corner of somebody's desk. It was a picture of Charlie Kirk, and it looked like it was a bit memorialized. I wouldn't say it looked necessarily like a Jesus sort of like a picture somebody might have in their home, but it certainly was a memorializing photo. And I think sort of the vibe of the business and the people working there when I got there, it made sense to me. But what's reminded me about that is it was digested, sure, as political violence, but then also you did get I would say a minority, a very small minority, but a minority that is really entrenched and deep in political culture, and political culture from their particular view inside of it, celebrating Charlie Kirk's murder. And I don't think that that's a super widespread sentiment, but it's certainly in certain circles is something that gets rewarded, right? By pointing out what he'd said prior to his death, particularly about gun violence, about immigration, some of his more racially charged and racist things that he said, as at the very least sort of I'm not going to be sad about it because. And I think he was digested as a sort of a cultural martyr. And they kind of welcomed the hatred, I guess, as sort of a proof that this radical left is just inhumane, and they don't share any of our values. They don't share our political culture, and so they kind of are the enemy. And I feel that there's a kind of a nice reverse dynamic of that going on here, where people see her as sort of a representative of their cause, of their side, who was trying to stand up to ICE, who people already felt they're a rogue agency with a lot of ideological actors, just like we expect a lot of the EPA to be filled with people who probably care about the environment that might skew them one way or the other. Who's joining ICE? It's probably not the same people who are the folks in your hometown that are police officers. These are people who are joining ads on the internet where it looks like that they can get a gun and be cool. And I don't, that's not to indict an indictment of every ICE officer, but it seems to me that this was digested as sort of another, like, we got one of yours. Or, you get people who say, we play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Nobody would say that in a different context. And it's because this is not, people aren't looking at this as they're not looking at it forensically, who's in the right, who's in the wrong. and it's digested as, is this a representative of my side that was wrong and taken, or is it a representative of the other side? And I think that that's kind of similar to the January 6th case. It's beyond the actual facts of the case. The culture is taking it as a sort of a loss for one and a win for the other, and that's just not going to be conducive to getting us out of this mess. But what does keep me hopeful is I think the vast majority of people who are celebratory of this, who look to the administration and see their like lie, like calling her a domestic, saying that she was trying to rant, all of these things that Kristi Noem said that were just lies out from the beginning. I think you can even see Donald Trump change his reaction when he actually sees the video. I think the vast majority of this people in this country who don't vote, to the extent that they're consuming this, they feel like, hey, I don't really connect with people who are blocking ICE from doing their immigration enforcement, but I also don't think that the sentence for that is 3 shots to the face. And I think the more and more we can remember that that's where the median American is, and the more we can use that piece of insight to say, hey, you build a majority by trying to say we're not these two sides that needs to try to martyr each other or celebrate or think in these terms. The more and more we can try to point to saying, hey, the right was mad about Waco. Having a bunch of people in a cult with children and guns is not a good situation. Does that mean the ATF should go and bulldoze the building and contribute to a fire? Should Ruby Ridge, they've got all these, the right has these moments, I think, in their ideological lore where there are federal agents that are empowered to trample over our civil rights. Whether these people are in the right or wrong in any specific scenario, there's a case of big government coming in and trampling over your rights. And I would hope that this would be digested in a similar way, but
yeah, you'd think, right? Like this is a clear-cut case of an overreaching government trampling on a person's civil rights. But yeah, those people are right in line, supporting this thing and cheerleading it even. And listen, the gaslighting started immediately. We talked a little bit ago about the gaslighting around January 6th. Well, like her body was still warm when they started lying about her. So this from The Guardian, and I'm going to quote several lines from this article. So the victim blaming began almost immediately after news broke of Good's killing on Wednesday. Tricia McLaughlin, Assistant Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security and a regular spokesperson for ICE, declared in a post on X that one of these violent rioters weaponized her vehicle, attempting to run over our law enforcement officers in an attempt to kill them, an act of domestic terrorism. A lie. She also said multiple ICE officers were hurt when videos of the shooting showed no such thing. Later that afternoon, according to DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, she said without evidence that Good had been stalking and impeding ICE officers before using her car as a weapon to try and run down the agent who killed her. President Trump repeated the claims in an inflammatory post on his Truth Social platform, and in a later interview with the New York Times, adding the disprovable assertion that she didn't try to run him over, she ran him over. Again, we all saw the video. Not true. J.D. Vance, the vice president, joined the fray on Thursday in an angry rant directed at the media during a White House press briefing. It was obvious to everybody, he suggested, that Good was so brainwashed by left-wing ideology that she was determined to kill a law enforcement officer. This is classic terrorism, Vance said. Everybody who's been repeating the lie that this is some innocent woman who was out for a drive in Minnesota when a law enforcement officer shot at her, you should be ashamed of yourself. I will state that Vance should be ashamed of himself. He used to know better. Finally, perhaps the most disgusting of all, right-wing Fox News host Jesse Waters attacked her personal life in a segment on Wednesday night, pointing out, quote, pronouns in her bio and that she leaves behind a lesbian partner and a child from a previous marriage. Chuck, which one of those people is the biggest piece of shit?
Oh, that's a tall question, but honestly, I think it is to state a narrative without really taking into account the facts of what happened is just, it's, I don't even know if I have the words for it. I mean, the irresponsible, stupid, just despicable, however you want to frame it. I mean, you could list the adjective. I mean, Jesse Walters is not one of those people that I would go to for any kind of factual based information, just for the fact the guy is a complete putz. But, and that may be insulting to putzes everywhere, but I mean, it's it's close enough. But you just can't look at that fact. You cannot look at all that information and then say that what they have said. I mean, it is quite literally trying to tell the public, believe what we tell you, not what you see. And this is how fascists work. They tell you that we know better than you do. You don't know what you're doing. And again, it all plays together in that same narrative, and we've seen it repeated so many times. Now, the fact that this case has been so widely recorded and is out there in the public sphere, will it start degrading some of this stupidity? I hope. I don't know how far I can hope on it, to be perfectly honest, but
Yeah.
I would think that
Well,
we throw an idea.
And Chuck, we again, we talked about the gaslighting around January 6th. We talked about the gaslighting around Renee Good. We're never going to get the truth in this thing because the FBI is freezing out officials in Minnesota, right? The Trump administration blocked the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension from investigation, saying they couldn't be trusted to conduct a fair inquiry. Initial plans to coordinate, as is normal in such cases, right, was scrapped on Thursday by Kash Patel's FBI. State and city investigators are collecting evidence independently. Now, Patel has diverted thousands of FBI employees to support ICE officials. Experienced FBI agents had previously warned this could create a conflict of interest in cases just like this. FBI, ICE working together side by side on things like this. Tabitha, they can't possibly conduct a fair and impartial investigation.
I don't think so. And when all of this was going on, I always kind of used my grandfather as my barometer for manhood, if you will. And I just heard my grandpa's like words in my ear, and he's like, "These aren't men." And then I finally saw someone say it, because my grandpa was a veteran as well, so I have an enormous amount of respect for veterans. So finally saw a Vietnam veteran say it like it was, and it was crystal clear. And I think it addressed it just as it was. Not that it necessarily had to be a man that said it, but I think that it comes across a certain way when you have a Vietnam vet speak certain words to your face about how he feels about your activities, and specifically saying that he's saying it to your face. And my grandpa was that kind of guy, and I was raised around a lot of guys like that. I'm deep in MAGA territory, and I feel like the way to talk about these type of things is to go back to that way of explaining things. People will understand that. It's like, hey, I don't know, like, what would your grandparents have said? Like, the ones that participated in, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, like, what would their opinion have been about this activity? Like, my grandpa, like, I can't say exactly what he would have said because he was a very colorful guy, but he would have called these guys out and been like, you know what? No real man is going to shoot a woman in the face, period. Let alone when they're not threatened, let alone when they don't have a weapon, let alone when you can see stuffed animals in her car. I just think it's ridiculous. Like any argument on the other side, and as a lesbian myself, it doesn't matter like who you sleep with. Some things are just basic. And to dehumanize people like that, like I don't know. I think we're backsliding a lot with some of these things, and our way of appealing to the other side, if you will, is to rehumanize them and say, "Hey, you know what? I realize you're angry. I realize you need somebody to hate right now, but remember back in the day, like you guys didn't even do business that way.
Ivan, I'll give you the last words on this this case for this week. What is this the event that really pushes people over the edge to reject this Trumpism, this burgeoning fascist hellscape that we're living in? And we've seen a lot of good protests this week over the event. I mean, here in Indiana, people are coming out in cities all over the country to say her name, to say the name of Renee Nicole Good.
Yeah, I think we're at a time right now where the popularity of immigration enforcement has hit an all-time low, which comes from a time just recently, right before the election, where support for immigration was at a relative high. I think that the administration has put it in the minds of the American public that immigration enforcement looks like masked goons in unmarked vans coming in like hog tying like a bunch of grandmas that have been in the country for 30 years. When during the campaign they said we're going to take the criminal illegals, right? Only the violent, the most violent, that's what we're going for. And then you get somebody like Stephen Miller that pulls ICE away from going to big corporate job sites where they've got bosses that are taking advantage of undocumented immigrants that are essentially indentured servants, right? They can't unionize, they can't bargain for higher wages because as soon as they get, start demanding a little bit more, they're replaceable. These companies have the power to keep ICE away from these places. And Stephen Miller says, no, don't enforce immigration where we might actually address at least what their conception of the labor argument is that American workers are getting these jobs chased away. No, don't do that. Go to Home Depot. Go do performatively cruel things so that you can get somebody like Jesse Waters to say something inflammatory. And I want to go to something Chuck said about Jesse Waters being a putz and stupid. I honestly think he's smart, but he's a paid propagandist is the point. I don't think he's doing any sort of analysis of the video and giving his heartfelt thoughts to an audience. He knows that the niche that Fox News has is selling people blood pressure medicine by getting them angry, sitting at home, maybe reclined in a lazy boy, driving people's blood pressure up so that they go on Twitter, so that they maybe go in this YouTube chat. And the enemy is not the bosses. The enemy is not the person who's making sure that their blood pressure medicine is unaffordable because it's great for their corporate profits. They're not mad at that. They're mad at us. And I think there's examples, all across American political life. But that's the insidious point: is that Jesse Waters is playing a role, but if he wasn't there, somebody else would know, oh, I can get a primetime slot on Fox News if this is how I carry myself, if I say things in this way, because that's ultimately the point, is make the advertisers happy, further drive the American public apart so that there's no political coalition that can actually change things.
Yeah, so I guess, listen, about political coalitions, right? I don't know what it's going to take for some people. I think we've laid out a pretty clear roadmap here. We've given detail just this week in America, the first full week of January 2026 in the United States. We are threatening Western Hemisphere neighbors. We kidnapped the head of state of a sovereign nation. We're threatening allies. We're making up stories about historical events, rewriting history, gaslighting the American people. We've got masked thugs in unmarked vehicles, secret police, right? Show me your badge. Who are you? Who do you work for? What, you can't do that with these guys. They are not accountable like your local police department. Say what you will about your local police department. They have problems. But when are we going to say this is fascism? I've got too many Democrats who don't realize the severity of the situation we're in. They think, oh, we're being divisive in pointing out what is plainly in front of us. Republicans like Ron Paul came out this week and said the F word himself, okay? Rand Paul has given some pushback. Tom Massey has given some pushback. I need anybody who still is comfortable putting an R next to their name to draw a line. I can't reach across the aisle and pretend to do bipartisanship with somebody who will not say enough is enough. They need to call for their president to resign. They need to disavow him. They need to remove him from their party. So I don't know. Chuck, what's the line? Is this fascism?
Absolutely. It absolutely is. And, you know, like we kind of talked about earlier, fascism doesn't start all at once. And it really has solidified. And if people don't see that it's a government of the few for the few instead of being run by the people, the government's trying to run us. And if you don't see that in this, I mean, in this very straightforward case, it says, I mean, this isn't even so much, Trump, because everybody wants to call out the Trump derangement thing. Okay, this is a cohesive plan that has been working forward for quite a period of time, and we just haven't, it's happened slowly enough to where we didn't realize we were losing the battle until the battle was already far, pretty far down the road. But is it impossible to turn around? No, because again, we the people need to exert that pressure to say, hey, this is not where we want to go. This is not the country we're going to have, and we can turn it around. I mean, we used to train our personnel back in 1945 to understand what fascism is. I mean, it's a little hard to classify every now and again, but I mean, when it comes right down to it, it's literally the few governing everyone. And it's not the way it's supposed to be in our society. It's supposed to be we, the people, governing ourselves. And, there's a line from a popular movie, the government should be fearful of the people, not the other way around. I butchered that a little bit, but you get the general idea.
No, absolutely. And Tabitha, I'll ask you. I mean, what is it going to take for people to realize that this is fascism? I like to paint it like this. This is not the Wizard of Oz, okay? It's not some like reverse Wizard of Oz where your house is lifted up from 4K 2020s and dropped into black and white 1930s Auschwitz or something, right? It is not like that. It happens slowly over time, and you accept a little more and a little more and a little more and a little more. Am I reading that right?
My parents are MAGA. I come from a very red area. Like, I'm speaking from experience here. Like, half the reason I'm doing this is because I'm trying to appeal to members of my own family before it's too late. I feel like there are people in my own community that I grew up with, that I respected, that I don't want to throw them out with the bathwater. Like, I'm not doing this because I'm like, I'm right. We have to be right. I'm doing this because we need to save our nation and because I care about my community and I care about my neighbors. And at the end of the day, we're all Americans. And I do think that it's a small faction that is whipping us up into a frenzy. But if you were to pull some of the things out and really speak to people, which I do on the regular, you can't say when people have been brainwashed by Fox News and things like that for as long as they have been, it's hard to have a conversation with them if you start with things like fascism. It's just too much for their system. So it's like you just have to ask them just normal questions. Like, I don't know, like I can use my grandfather, for example, to appeal to someone in that type of fashion and be like, hey, I don't know, like, seems a little messed up. Like, what do you think your grandparents would have thought, knowing maybe that their grandparents were veterans? Um, I don't think we're going to get anywhere. If the objective is to save the nation, we're not going to get anywhere by polarizing because outwardly, our enemies like Russia, that maybe even our president likes to rub shoulders with. I do think it was a shock to the system for regular Americans to see us have veterans roll literally out a red carpet for a war criminal. But you can't say it like that to the other side. You have to say things like, how would you feel if Illinois rolled up tanks to the border of Indiana and said, we're going to take it? And they'd say, we'd play hell. And so you have to appeal to people like that. And I don't know.
I, for one, would welcome our Chicagoan overlords.
Yeah, no, I understand, right? But if you're appealing to someone from like that, like deep guttural place of, I am a Hoosier and I believe in Hoosier things, if that is like very extreme right for them, find the humanity in it. And if we just continue to try and find the humanity in all these types of things and be like, you know what, like, how would you feel if this happened to you? I think maybe that's the only path forward.
Ivan, thoughts?
Yeah, I really like what Tabitha had to say there, and I know that frustrating is among the many adjectives you can use, but when you look at a scenario and a situation like we have, there's no other natural sort of reaction than to call it what it is and call it what it looks like, and take their own quotes and say, how is this not fascism? But I take this sort of experience, and I really appreciate Tabitha's perspective of having people in her own personal life that she's patient with, and knowing that you need to appeal to that humanity side. I relate this to some of my struggles interpersonally with friends that are Jewish and were and are somewhere on the Zionism perspective, or spectrum rather. If I went, I mean, I did tell them on October 8th, like, hey guys, what happened in Israel was an awful war crime. It's terrible. But looking through this history, I'm just really concerned that every single time one of these flare-ups happen, the death toll is 20-1. And I knew I got expectingly a lot of pushback, and a lot of people don't understand. But if I just came out and said at the beginning and was insistent that they called it a genocide or saw it as a genocide, I think I wouldn't have 2 years down the line these people saying, hey, I'm back on Instagram and TikTok, because before I would just see people who before were signaling their membership to the right causes. There was Black Lives Matter. They were mad about Trump being elected, and now those same people are kind of participating in a cause against something that's held very near and dear to me. And I think it's a very similar analogy in the sense that people like the people here in the comments, they're not saying that Trump saved America because they're looking at their pocketbook and they're looking at their community around, and that people are talking to each other again, and that small businesses are opening up. It's not that. It scratches an itch and a hunger to them that exists outside of their actual civic engagement. And I think the way you do that on a personal level is 100% humanity and empathy and patience, which is a hard ask of most people. And I think it's something that you need to model and invite people into rather than demanding, because you're telling me to not be frustrated and angry about something that is transparently fascism. But then on a wider lens, I think you get Trump and you get this takeover because you've got a very vocal minority and then an apathetic majority. And you saw somebody like Obama in 2008 winning Indiana because the circumstances were very clear, but also he ran on a platform of hope and change. He didn't go into Indiana and say necessarily, I'm the first Black man to be a nominee of a major party, and that's why you should vote for me. You should vote for me because the banks just gambled away our economy and you're getting foreclosed on. It is time for hope and change. Yes, we can. It's not, oh, but maybe it might get blocked in Congress, so I don't want to promise this. Hope and change. Yes, we can. And obviously the Democrats sold that out. Once they got into power, they had a trifecta. And the best we could do was a helpful handout to the private insurance companies. But I think that context is really important to keep in mind, that an actual counter movement that speaks to the same sort of material concerns and grievances people had about America in 2015, that is how you're going to steal people away from this movement, is by scratching that itch that says somebody is fighting for me and against these institutions that I feel like have sold me out. And we've got, the Democrats are the only ones that are meaningfully doing that, but those are individual Democrats. Those are not Chuck Schumer, because Chuck Schumer, he's mad that he wasn't involved in the Venezuela takeover. He's not.
Right,
Nobody ever put out a statement saying, no more intervention, no more. They were okay with us getting al-Shara in Syria, having a former Al-Qaeda member running Syria. They were okay with Hillary Clinton was in charge of the Libya coup. I mean, it's if you define fascism, which I think people most do, as a kind of a nexus between the state and corporate interests, like you had in Nazi Germany with IG Farben, that's been essentially the story of America post World War II with the trappings of democracy. And that's not to say there's no meaningful difference between a Trump administration in 2026 and before, but I think those are the things I keep in mind that say hope is possible, because the 70% is either apathetic or fed up.
Yeah. And you know what? There are signs that even some Republicans are beginning to get fed up, and we saw a little bit of this week. So,
Scott, can I
for
just say one
example,
thing too?
yeah, go ahead, Tab.
I think it's important to tell people, like, living in a red area, the feedback that I get back about Democrats is this: they feel like they're uppity and they think that everybody is stupid. And you cannot approach people that way. Like my grandfather, he had like an 8th grade education. And I think he was one of the smartest men in the world because he practiced humanity. And these people are not stupid. You just have to appeal to them in a way to lift them up, not drag them down.
There are a whole lot of people with advanced degrees in Congress, a lot of lawyers, and man, for all the schooling they have, there's a lot of idiots in that room. But again, a couple of them this week maybe saw some light, maybe saw an opportunity to push back. So the House this week passed a bill to extend healthcare subsidies in defiance of GOP leaders. The final vote was 230 to 196 after several Republicans joined on the discharge petition, bypassing Speaker Johnson. Now, this bill moves on to the Senate, where a small bipartisan group has been working on an alternative plan there. On average, the more than 20 million subsidized enrollees in the Affordable Care Act program are seeing their premium costs rise by 114% in 2026. I know people whose insurance premiums have tripled. It's insane. Also, on the other side of the Capitol, the Senate pushed back on Trump's military threats against Venezuela with a vote on the War Powers Act. 5 Republicans there joined Democrats to advance the resolution that would limit the president's ability to use U.S. troops in Venezuela. The 5 Republicans crossing the aisle were Josh Hawley of Missouri, Rand Paul of Kentucky, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Susan Collins of Maine, and Indiana's Todd Young. Young, in a statement, said he supported the operation to capture Maduro because, we got to let them have a little fascism as a treat. But he was concerned by Trump's statements that his administration now, quote unquote, runs Venezuela. Young said, quote, "It is unclear if that means that an American military presence will be required to stabilize the country," adding that he believed most of his constituents, meaning us Hoosiers, were not prepared to send U.S. troops to that mission. Hey, Todd, you're right this time. Broken clock, right twice a day, right? Now, the War Powers Act, for what it's worth, was passed in the aftermath of Vietnam over President Richard Nixon's veto, though it has never actually stopped a president from engaging in military action. Congress hasn't formally declared war since World War II, even though we've gallivanted all across the globe, involving ourselves in, Korea, Vietnam, Iran, Nicaragua, Chile. I mean, honestly, the number of places we've got a military presence is probably it's shorter if I give you the ones where we haven't engaged. But Chuck, is this something to hold on to? Is this the guardrails holding a little bit? I mean, man, if they're by a threat, right?
Yeah, it's by a hair, and the fact that they're just now starting to rebuke some of the, and it's fractional. I mean, they're making these small moves, and I hate to say it, but I want to say that While yes, that's the right move, but they also realize that this is politically toxic for them to be in support of what this guy is doing right now because of the vocalized backlash that the American public is putting out there. Um, I am not a Todd Young advocate by any stretch of the imagination. The fact that he was a Marine still befuddles me on a certain light because he does not act in that vein, at least to my understanding of it. Um, but I think that yes, it is part of the system starting to fry. The question that resonates in my mind is this administration so far has not cared about the rules, either domestically, internationally. It's my way, highway. I don't care what anybody says. So I really kind of um, wonder, I guess, in a sense. Okay, Congress passed. I mean, they passed the Epstein law. To get the files out there, and yeah, that was followed beautifully. I mean, they don't care about the laws, and so how does the lawmaking body then exert its control? The only way it's really going to work if they're really going to stand up for what's right is to get this knucklehead out of the way and remove the entirety of it, not just the orange tyrant. You got to get all of it out and then start over again. And we'll see.
No, like you said, you can't just cut out part of it. MAGA is a cancer. You have to remove the whole thing. And I think the sooner like certain Republicans understand that, the better. But Tabitha, like Chuck said, I mean, is this going to amount to anything?
I was glad that Young voted the way that he did. He does have a little bit of a history, sometimes, of working across the aisle, which had, really dialed back recently. So this is sort of one of the first times that I've been like, okay, let's see what he does. He's definitely better than Banks. I mean, I know it's not like great options, but
That's a pretty low bar. Yeah.
yeah, but we're kind of I think that's the point, right? Like we're working with a low bar, and that is why the American public has kind of largely stayed out of politics, because they believed that they were two sides of the same coin. And I would sort of be inclined to say yes. We've had several opportunities on both sides. I mean, these are the people that are supposed to represent the interests of the American public, right? And they've just been
Directly.
skating along for a while now and making their backroom deals on all these things. And now the American public is starting to take notice again. Not in mass, not the numbers we kind of want to see, but just like with the redistricting vote, I didn't expect it to go that way. But I think that was an indication of reading the room. And they're like, you know what? Like, we should be more afraid of these Hoosiers than we are afraid of Washington. Because they're like, the feeling in the room is a little more like France than here right now. You know what I'm saying? And I think they were a little scared, and I think they have a right to be. And now we just need to figure out a way to make the rest of them a little bit more scared.
I haven't. So I guess, I'll ask you a similar question. Is this going to amount to anything? I mean, like, listen, it's good to see this this sort of pushback. Maybe there are a handful of Republicans that don't want their constituents' health insurance to go up 300%. Maybe there are some, that are nominally libertarians that actually care about not engaging in regime change wars overseas. But it's going to take more than a handful, right?
Yeah. I first want to give you credit, Scott. Your transition from the last subject to this one was absolutely phenomenal and impeccable. That was just great showmanship. But I think what this is probably an example of is a dynamic that happens all the time in Congress, where these are show votes in a sense. I bet there's a lot more Republican senators than the 4 you said that came over.
5, yeah.
5, yeah. I'm sure that there's a lot more than that, but what they wanted was just enough to get over that line and to get it passed. And this is what you get with Kirsten Sinema and somebody like Joe Manchin on the left, if something is to just barely pass, you might get a couple Republicans, but those are going to be the ones that drop off. And there's things that, hey, if I'm a senator from California and there's a big tech company that wants a law to be defeated or to pass, I might buck my donors. And it might seem like I'm going to buck my donors and take this vote, right? Or if you're Marie Gluesenkamp Perez in Washington, represented from Washington, she's conservative on some issues, but every time she's voting against the Democrats, the thing passes anyway, or it fails anyway. And so there's always this sort of gamesmanship with how many votes can we lose, how many votes can we gain, and letting these people, there's this perception that maybe Susan Collins in Maine, can she take these tactical votes that means that the Republicans can never actually do the agenda that they purported to run on. We're just constantly getting thwarted, and Congress never does anything. And so I think that this is indicative of that also probably the Republican Senate caucus, if you ask them in a room, they're so much they're abhorred by the same things we're abhorred by, but they are actually scared of their constituents in a different way. That if Donald Trump goes into their state and supports a primary challenger, that they're going to lose their job and that they're not going to go and be able to be a lobbyist for Eli Lilly once they get out of Congress. And so I'm sure I think that it's kind of a sign of that, but that does mean that, as soon as that sort of veil drops, these people would be willing to buck Trump a lot more if he became even more of a lame duck. And they seem to think that the implications of bucking him have changed if he's soured in the eyes of the American public even more than he already is.
Yeah, well, it seems to me like you're describing kayfabe, right? It's like play fighting, it's professional wrestling. You can afford to look independent on this issue or that issue as long as the actual bill and the agenda moves forward. Exactly. And it's gonna take something more significant than that. But like it seems that the right, their agenda always moves forward. You have a couple senators or representatives or whatever that they feign independence. They're like Susan Collins. They're really concerned, and but on the left, there's always like one or two senators that throw sand in the gears and prevent our agenda from going forward. And so this, what I'm describing, the ratchet effect, right? Where we're always constantly moving to the right, and they lock in their gains, and we can't move things back the other way. And I like to make the joke that the ratchet effect is, as the kids say, ratchet, or at least they said that 10 to 15 years ago. So I want to stay on Senator Young as we move from our national stories to our Indiana stories this week. And really, it's given the scope and severity of everything we just talked about, it almost feels like small beans to talk about like Indiana politics and what's going on in the state legislature this week. But yet these things matter to our lives. I mean, that is where the laws that most affect us on a day-to-day basis are still made. And we've seen that our state legislature, some of the Republicans in it at least, have a modicum of independence from Trump. So, I guess that's something we can latch onto. But I wanted to stick on Senator Young because he actually sponsored the bill that I'm going to talk about now. So Indiana won National Drone Test Site designation. Senator Young spearheaded this effort. Indiana and Oklahoma were chosen as new sites in which private companies, universities, and military contractors can undertake drone development and testing. Existing drone sites already exist in 7 other states. Indiana's bid was sponsored by the IEDC. Withhold comment on them, and Applied Research Institute. The boundaries of this site are still to be determined, but are expected to encompass a wide swath of the state, from Purdue all the way down to southern Indiana. And Young pointed out, he pointed to this designation as proof that President Trump would not, in fact, punish the state for failing to redraw congressional maps at his behest. Chuck, concerns? Excitement? What do you think about Indiana being a drone test site?
Yes. I mean, I guess in a certain way, I guess if it's the idea to bring, an ability for people to have good jobs and build these things that are usable in certain areas, I guess that's a positive thing. The questionable use of how drones could be effective in various areas, either domestically or abroad, that's a whole nother show there upon itself. But one of the thoughts that ran across my mind with this is, okay, we've got this thing coming in. They talk about crane and this large swath of area. Is this a leap type construct just in the idea of now a national defense contracting, so it really makes me wonder what this looks like in its entire, when it comes to actually, things coming into the state. Um, Again, okay, resources, how is that going to look with all this other demand that we have? Are we going to have to limit one thing to serve another? Is it going to call for increases in data center construction? I mean, these are all concepts that we kind of have to be observant of. And as I've said in many areas, and I know people that have probably heard me say this, they're sick of it by now, but resources are not infinite. We have to be very cognizant of what we are bringing in, how we are using our resources that we have. Water, again, that's my area of expertise, that water is not this infinitely abundant thing that is just going to poof out of the air magically. I mean, there is a
I don't know, Chuck. You just described rain.
Yeah, I did just put that one out there, didn't I? My bad. Okay. Meteorology aside, groundwater resources. I mean, we don't have, we have to be careful, and in the state legislature, in the federal government, they don't care about natural resources because with the whole deregulation of everything that they're pushing for, clean water, clean air, these things are just not priorities for these people because they see it as an impediment. They don't realize that there's actual investment opportunities in those spaces if we were to go down those roads. So back to the general point, is this a good thing? It could be if it is done in a responsible way, but responsibility is not one of those things this administration is necessarily taken to heart, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, well, they mentioned like delivering life-saving medications as a potential use for these drones, and like surveying pipelines and stuff. That's great. I'm personally worried that they're gonna test them, test out like using them the way the Israelis do to drone bomb my house or something for being a dissident. But I guess we can't live in fear of that happening at this point. I wanted to look at another story, sort of involving national level Hoosiers, and Congressman Jim Baird was hospitalized briefly this week after a car crash in D.C. The 80-year-old congressman representing the 4th District was released with scrapes and bruising. His wife required surgery and is still hospitalized last I checked. Now, Baird's hospitalization, as well as the recent passing of Representative Doug LaMalfa of California, as well as the resignation of Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, highlights the narrow GOP majority in the House. I believe, unless Baird is returned to Washington or returned to work at this point, they can lose one vote to get legislation passed. Tabitha, what do you think? A couple more things like this, a couple more losses, a couple more absences, maybe a resignation. Is Speaker Mike Johnson still going to be Speaker by Election Day?
These people are tricky. They've always got something up their sleeve. And I wouldn't count them out because, I mean, look at the Heritage Foundation and all this stuff that they've had cooking for so long. I would bet they just have a plan, and they have probably had a plan for, well, what if somebody gets hospitalized? What if someone leaves? I don't know. But I wanted to go back to the water issue real fast, if I may. In Indiana, I think if you've been here long enough, part of being a Hoosier, especially a rural Hoosier, most all of us have heard that expression, there's many ways to skin a cat. And I think if they're going to bring in this drone technology, then we should ask what the public is getting from it, because there are a lot of people that would love to get their pilot's license in drone technology, but they're not going to do that. But maybe we should press them on that sort of thing. Like, right, we have new industry coming in. We have kids that want to go to college. We have technical schools. What are you offering up when you're bringing this here? And also with the water issue, I think it would only be fair if we're pumping this toxic water back into Indianapolis, because then they would start to care. Or maybe equally
yeah,
disperse it.
Carmel, Fishers, Noblesville.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah, the
Definitely make sure and hit the state house. I'm just saying, because fair is fair. And I think that's the sort of thing that Hoosiers should be saying right now. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. So don't come in the rural areas and think that people are so stupid that they're just going to allow this. Give them an alternative. Even if it's a hypothetical, doesn't mean they couldn't do it. They're going to pump this water somewhere, and they shouldn't be pumping it back into the reservoir. They should be pumping it to like the governor's house. Just saying.
yeah, yeah.
Give the Hoosiers, give the people what they want. Give them options.
Regarding rural areas, Ivan, I don't know if you saw this. So on Wednesday, about 24 Democratic candidates for the state legislature simultaneously filed to run in rural and small town districts following a Wednesday State House press conference by the Indiana Rural Summit. Summit founder Michelle Higgs highlighted that Republicans in gerrymandered rural districts often run unopposed. So I think this is, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of David Pepper. He wrote a book called Laboratories of Autocracy, wrote a follow-up book as well. Actually, Pepper just was named as Amy Acton's running mate for governor of Ohio. So congratulations to him. I've met Pepper a couple times. Good guy. But anyway, one of the things he talks about in his books is the importance of making sure every race is contested. Giving people a choice, for so often I think Democrats have given up on rural areas and just let Republicans take them, and it's given us poor outcomes in rural areas. Ivan, do you think rural Hoosiers are ready to test a different brand? Are they over Republican supermajority governance? At least enough of them.
If they are, I mean, this is the kind of organizing strategy that I think would precipitate that reality. And I think, oh wow, something Tabitha said earlier was that I think a lot of the identification with the Republican Party that you get in particularly rural Indiana does not come from people going down an itemized list of positions on, but that's not how anybody generally develops their political identity and affiliations. It's this feeling that particularly on the national level, Democrats look down on me. They think I'm dumb. The cultural and economic centers have shifted away from the Midwest when it was manufacturing towards the information, cultural sphere, this cosmopolitan stuff that I don't really connect with. And the way you're going to beat back on that is by getting representatives of those communities that say, hey, I'm one of you. And the kind of issues that I'm worried about is forget all of that. What I'm worried about is Mike Braun weaponizing the IEDC to line his own buddies' pockets. I'm worried about giving all of these giveaways to data centers, to big tech companies that are not based in Indiana, not based in the Midwest. They're coming here because they want cheap land and, people who they think will just get rolled over. And if you can get people that can say that loud enough in the right fora with the right strategy, that are going to the churches, that are going to the places of community and saying, hey, I'm not funded by corporate America. This, you as much as you might like the social positions of your current representative, I mean, look at their donations from Eli Lilly. Look at their donations from all the people connected to the IEDC. That corruption message, I think, is the reason people associate with the Republicans is that there's just not anything resembling a palatable Democratic response to them. And I don't think the palatable Democratic response looks like throwing all those all those social issues and just adopting the Republicans' position on them, because you're never going to win that battle with them. You have to redefine the game on your own ground in your own terms. And economic populism and anti-corruption is exactly the terms that we need to be defining it on. And is from what I've seen and from what I know about Michelle Higgs and the other folks involved in the Indiana Rural Summit, that's exactly the kind of ground that they're staking their campaign on.
Democrats used to dominate rural areas decades ago, but before the Civil Rights Act, and you could talk about the Southern strategy and Nixon and Reagan and all that. And but if you just look at the economy and talk about things from an economic populist perspective, you have to be able to tell people in these areas, listen, they're using the culture war stuff. They're dangling the keys in front of you while they're picking your pocket on the other end. I think that resonates people. And you don't have to abandon our cultural values. We don't have to abandon supporting marginalized communities, but we have to shift the conversation back to the economy. Hey, don't you worry about those people. Let them live their lives. What about your pocketbook? They're ripping you off. Ivan, you want to say something?
Yeah, and I think a beautiful case study in that is not only is it unwise to your own beliefs and cause, but I think it actually damages your cause when you say, "Hey, this is my sincerely held belief, but because I don't think it's popular and going to advance my career, I'm gonna shy away or lie to you, or you seem like a slimy politician." You get somebody like Andy Bashir, who solidifies that trust with Kentuckians. He's brought a lot of jobs, manufacturing jobs, to Kentucky without completely prostituting out the state and giving them handouts and giveaways. But when he says, "Hey, I'm vetoing this piece of legislation, revolving trans athletes in schools," he says, "We might disagree, and I know that this veto is going to get overridden by the state legislature. I'm vetoing it in vanity. It's not going anywhere. But I still am going to tell you, even if I think this is going to be unpopular with voters, that this is what I believe, and I'm coming from it from this perspective." And I think as long as you've got that foundation of their shared economic interests and you feel like you're a fighter, people will honestly respect the fact. I mean, Donald Trump, not exactly the most conservative family values man, but they felt like he was
Right.
open and honest and showing his hand. And I think that people appreciate that only if they feel like you've satisfied those economic issues. So yeah, I would say that there's not only is it unwise to your own movement, but it undermines your own trust and your own chances at pulling this thing off if you come across as inauthentic and like you're just trying to triangulate where exactly the voters want to be.
Keyword authenticity. Yeah, as unhinged as Trump is, you get the impression he actually believes the things he's saying. Whereas with a lot of Democrats, they're calculated. They don't want to actually commit to anything, and you got to own it. You got to be angry. I look at somebody like Graham Plattner in Maine is out there like furious, rightfully so, at the things going on in our country. So I want to move on. We're talking about these rural legislative candidates, and the legislature is back in session this week after a hiatus. They started the session early in December in an attempt to pass Trump's rigged congressional maps. Thankfully, those were defeated with the help of several Hoosier Republicans. Now, in the state Senate, the Republicans there released a very slim priority list of bills at the beginning of the session on Monday. Now, this is from the Capitol Chronicle. So Indiana Senate Republicans released a slim priority agenda. Sorry, it was Wednesday, targeting what they call waste, fraud, and abuse in Indiana's food and health care benefit programs. Senate Bill 1, authored by Senator Chris Garton of Charlestown. This is the same guy who last month gave a raging fascist fire-breathing screed in favor of that redistricting proposal at the State House. Also posted AI slop of himself beating up Santa Claus on Christmas Day. Like this guy is obviously down the right-wing rabbit hole, because here he is pushing the same waste, fraud, and abuse in social safety net programs that they're talking about up in Minnesota. It's just not there. Listen, if there's fraud, you prosecute fraud, but you don't cut off entire families and entire communities just to prove a point. So there was only one other bill highlighted by Senate Republicans, a Senate Joint Resolution 1, the second prong of a three-part process aimed to amend the Indiana Constitution. Our founding document in this state makes nearly everyone eligible for bail, but this proposal would allow judges to deny bail to anyone they deemed a, quote, substantial risk. So, yeah, more jail, more incarceration for Hoosiers. These guys are really committed to it. Now, on the other side of the hall, the House Republicans issued 4 bills aimed at taking on housing affordability, electric utility rates, government efficiency, and educational language. Not a lot of stuff in there. Again, very, very narrow priorities from Hoosier Republicans this year. Democrats, without much power to do anything, did issue their priorities for this legislative session, which includes, I'm going to read a list: eliminating sales tax on utility bills, making the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission an elected body, banning spending in politics by utility companies, capping health insurance premiums by ensuring the State Health Insurance Commission considers affordability as a factor when approving or denying premium increases, creating a state health insurance exchange, keeping medical debt from affecting credit scores, creating a tax-free savings account for people saving toward their first home purchase, establishing a first-time homebuyer grant program funded by predatory real estate corporations, developing a public-private child care program to split costs between employers, the state, and parents, and keeping violent offenders off the streets and deterring violent crimes against law enforcement officers through sentencing enhancements. Now, Chuck, blind taste test. Most Hoosiers are going to say, oh, look at that. And then you say, oh, that's the Democrats. And they're like, oh, they're a bunch of libtards. How do you get over that?
Well, I think Ellen said it kind of really to the point, and I think we've kind of been hitting the general theme of you look at the priorities between the two constructs, and one's kind of favoring more restrictions, more taking away, more this, more those kind of things. Whereas if you talk to people on a humanistic level, and even if it's the hard thing, leadership is not always easy, and you have to be able to stay true to who we are. And I think as the Democratic Party, and I can say this for the candidates that we have here in Hancock County going forward, they're really focused on trying to make life better for everybody, not just a certain populace or economic status quo. And however, in our legislature, with the things that they are focusing on with these various educational matters or various utility matters, or these things that they globally throw a lot of spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. They do that to kind of take away from what they're doing elsewhere. And while they acknowledge SB1 did a lot of things, it also screwed up a lot of things. And they haven't really addressed the problems that they created with that SB1 bill. So now they have to go, they're trying to save face because they know they're coming up on another election cycle. They know they're going to have, it's going to be a hard fight because Hoosiers have said, look, we don't agree with how this is going. And I think a lot of people, Dylan's point, is starting to see these folks are not doing what they said they would do for us. They have not made it easier for local farmers to stay in business. They have not made it easier for us to afford things on a very local level. And the fact that they use this utility term in the legislature quite frequently, they have to, and I think that's a bad idea. They need to state it more accurately. It's the electrical companies, the for-profit entities, and those things that really set a stage of saying, well, we can go after this because the IREC is not going to stand against us. And in fact, more times than not, they go with it because they are politically, appointed, and they don't have any allegiance other than to the political winds that put them in place. I think having elected, if we're going to keep them political, then fine, let's make it elected and really have representatives on that committee that understand the utility frameworks where we could save money, where we could make better investments and have a stronger Indiana moving forward for everybody instead of just more money, more money, more money from people that, from our ratepayers.
Tabitha, I want to look at that what they're proposing in the Senate. Like it's basically one bill. Their whole one bill is let's make it harder for Hoosier families to access the resources they need. Now this is Chris Garton. Again, we've talked about this guy. Like just he's become my favorite shitheel Republican in the state legislature. GOP more like HGH. Am I right?
I'm just so over this like super alpha male bullshit. At the end of the day, it's like, you know what? Especially the farming community. The people that will really be honest with you will tell you it takes everyone on the farm, and their wives are not just staying in the house, same as their kids. Like everybody is out in the field picking up rocks. You know what I'm saying? So I think people just really appreciate just straight language that then people are held accountable for. Just say it plain. And at that point, it wouldn't matter, especially for people from the rural areas, I think, if whoever's running, if they're in office or if they're running for office, if they can show that they mean what they say and they're authentic and they're consistent. And like it takes a while to build one's reputation, right? But you have to stick with it. And the only people that are going to stick with it are the ones that believe in it. And people are seeing through that right now. Like it doesn't matter whether it's Chris Gardner, like Jesus. I mean, who wants to take on Santa? I just don't get it. Like
I had a good long conversation with his presumptive opponent for this fall right after this happened, and it's just gobsmacking. I don't know, man. Like if there's one thing you don't do, it's you take on jolly old Saint Nick. Ivan, you're just a wee one, so you do not remember 1994 and Newt Gingrich's contract with America. Now, filled with a bunch of terrible ideas. However, the idea of putting forward this contract and running on it and putting the platform in the center was, I think, a good political strategy. And I read down that long list of Democratic priorities in the House. Why can't Indiana Democrats, whose brand has been largely toxic in this state for a generation now, say, if you elect a bunch of us, this is what we will fight for? I don't know. Seems like a good idea to me. Am I wrong?
No, I think on the legislative side, they've got that part locked down. The bills you just read off to me would be among the ones that I would create a hypothetical platform that I think would be that wedge that you drive into the supermajority to say, hey, these guys are worried about messaging bills. These guys are worried about, locking people up even further. And they're not concerned about fixing your school funding, fixing your library funding, and things like that. But I think an example would be our next story of why that doesn't really get the traction you want, is that the messengers don't exactly have that kind of trust. And I think there's one element is that you can have Andrea Hunley, you can have Carrie Hamilton posting about these bills, but it's going to be a tree falling in a forest until you're getting. And actually, credit to Carrie Hamilton, she was on Rob Kendall's radio show, 93 WIBC Conservative Talk Radio in Indianapolis, talking about Mike Braun's Mid-State Corridor project that didn't get cut with all of the other Department of Transportation cuts going on. You need to get into fora and to information spaces where apolitical or, generally not super political, but maybe they vote or have some kind of, at least I'm not going to vote for the Democrats. I don't love the Republicans in this state. I think the way you got to get into these forums where people are actually shaping their political thought And then that's where you put forward that sort of agenda. And you need to have some sort of credibility, and you get that credibility by being consistent, as Tabitha was emphasizing, on these issues over time. But you also need to be in spaces where people hear that, and then you need to have that reputation of authenticity that comes from consistency, but then also comes from cleaning house. And you're probably going to see, I think you could probably tangibly say that you could affect the situation we're about to talk about if the Democrats from the state legislature were to apply pressure and say, hey, we can't go on a statewide level and say, trust us, Democrats. When we're given full control, we just don't ask any questions, and we fall into a political machine. But I won't spoil the next plot.
No, well, thank you for teeing that up for me. And unfortunately, we don't have a ton of time to talk about it. We've only got maybe 5 minutes to address all these issues. But you're hinting at the situation in Indianapolis, which is run by Democrats, and Mayor Joe Hogsett, who's now in his 3rd term there. Again, with Democrats like these, who needs Republicans? So, one of the pieces in the legislature that is up for debate is House Bill 1423, which largely falls in line with the recommendations made by the Indianapolis Local Education Alliance. And this would create a public education corporation made of 9 board members appointed by the mayor. The new body would have authority over control over school property, transportation, and essentially merge the charters and subvert the democratically elected IPS school board. And this thing, if it passes, goes into effect really quickly. It would require the mayor to appoint members to this body by June 1st of this year. So, like, right away. And of course, the one thing in this bill where they diverged from the recommendations of ILEA was that there's no mention of the need for additional special education funding. One recommendation from ILEA that does not appear to have been followed. Now, staying in Indianapolis with Hogsett, the Marion County Prosecutor's Office on January 6th released its quarterly grand jury report, which shows the grand jury heard testimony on 5 occasions in November and December. That testimony concerned, quote, unlawful touching and or unlawful communication by a public servant, and the unlawful pecuniary interest in a contract of a public servant and or former public servant. So this is from Mirror Indy. While the report doesn't go into further detail or name him specifically, this timeline matches up pretty precisely with the allegations against former Hogsett Chief of Staff Thomas Cook. In October, a Mirror Indy and Indy Star joint investigation found at least $80 million in public incentives were awarded or recommended to Cook's clients after he was forced to resign over a prohibited relationship with a subordinate. That employee, Scarlett Andrews, was promoted shortly after Cook's resignation to lead the Department of Metropolitan Development, the city agency responsible for the incentives that flowed to Cook's clients. This same guy, Thomas Cook, had also been previously accused of sexual misconduct and abuse by multiple women he had supervised in the mayor's office. Now, Hogsett's appointing a new chief of staff and deputy mayor this week. Now, he's had one since, a different one than Cook. Cook's been gone for a couple of years. Dan Parker has served since 2022. He just ended his term at the end of 2025. The new chief of staff is current Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department Chief Chris Bailey, who is leaving the force to become Hogsett's chief of staff and deputy mayor at the beginning of February. Now, again, we've maybe got 2 or 3 minutes to talk about this. So, Chuck, give me a quick thought.
Quick thought, no matter how you change it, the culture has to be changed, and Hogsett's not doing that. He's not living up to what is the right way to administrate these sexual abuse allegations. I mean, they should be dealt with, and they should be eliminated from the administration entirely. I mean, there's just no reason to have that happen at all. But that's my quick thought on it.
Yeah, and Tabitha, again, about 1 minute from you, but like, Hogsett and the Indianapolis Democrats doing stuff like that, allowing the corruption to take place under their noses, gutting public education. Are they ruining the Democratic brand in the whole state as the largest media market? When you see Indiana Democrat, you see Joe Hogsett.
I mean, man, the right doesn't need any more than that, do they? Really? I don't have anything else to say. I mean, it speaks volumes.
Ivan, last word on this before we move to our closing thoughts.
Yeah, I think it absolutely tarnishes the reputation of the Indiana Democrats as a whole, and especially when you don't get any kind of action or condemnation from the city county council, and the president of the city county council is widely thought to want to run for mayor, and he knows that Hogsett can keep this quiet and can insulate himself from all this fallout because he's at the top of the political machine. The sex story obviously gets the headlines, but you're directing. It could be financial mismanagement, and it can also be sexual misconduct. But when you've got power and you've got the ability to decide who you give benefits to that power, and you're Bob Ossoli, and you're the head of the city county council, you're going to kick somebody out like Jesse Brown, who wants to put transparency on this because you don't want Jesse Brown to mess up your chances of getting Joe Hogsett's machine and inheriting it yourself. So it's absolutely going to tarnish the Indiana Democrats' reputation when every level of government is insulating itself from criticism.
Yeah, listen, I will be crass here, but listen, not all Democrats are made alike, and I don't know what kind of girl y'all think I am, but just because you got a D doesn't mean I gotta suck it. So, let's close out this week with a couple quick hits. State Senator Greg Walker has changed his mind and says he will seek re-election. This from the Capitol Chronicle. Walker announced last summer he wouldn't seek re-election, but filed this Wednesday to run anyway. He does have a primary opponent, however, in State Rep Michelle Davis, one of the extreme Christian nationalists in her caucus. Walker was a vocal opponent of Trump's redistricting effort. Also, in light sports news, Friday night, the Indiana Hoosiers football team defeated Oregon at the Peach Bowl in Atlanta to move on to the national championship game next Monday night in Miami, where they will face the Hurricanes. We really are living in the upside down. Never thought I'd see it. And finally, this week, a bill was introduced at the State House to make the pork tenderloin Indiana's official state sandwich. Legend says it was invented in Huntington in 1908. The senator from the Huntington area, Andy Zay, sponsored this legislation. Indiana is 5th in the country in pork production, so there's a tie-in there. Again, I don't know, waste of time. These things are silly. I we have so many more problems we could be dealing with as a state, but I don't know, whatever. It's a stunt. I guess it's not that big of a deal. Let's go ahead and close this thing out. Chuck, where can the good folks find you online if they want to engage?
They can find me at HancockCountyDemocrats.com. Just a quick shameless plug. On the 28th, we're going to be having a speaker series with Bo Bai, just kind of a get to know type of session. So I invite everybody to come and be a part of that. Just find us through our website.
And Tabitha, you have a podcast, as do I. Where can folks listen to you?
Well, basically just Google me. I'm on all social media. You can type in Tabitha Ziegler or Staring Down the Storm, Autism Advocacy in America, and you'll find me.
And Ivan, the good folks can find you at Upland Sandy, I know is your handle. What platform, John?
Yeah, I'm posting regularly on Instagram. That's where I've got the most engagement and kind of give the most of my attention. But I'm also on TikTok. I'm posting as well on YouTube, and hopefully going to be getting soon into longer form video essay content. So check me out there as well. I'm also on X/Twitter at Upland Sandy as well.
Fantastic. I know a guy that can help you to distribute that stuff. So listen, so for me, folks, you can find me online at HoosLeft is my handle on most of the social media sites. It's at whosleft.us on Blue Sky and Instagram and Threads. Also, again, please, we really appreciate your support with our new media venture here, Progressive Indiana Network. The website is progressiveindiana.net. We could really, really use a subscription, paid subscription if you can afford it. Follow us on all the social media sites there. It is at Progressive Indiana Network on most of them, at PIN Indiana on Blue Sky and TikTok. I think that covers it. Rough week, everybody. Thank you guys for being here with us. Until next time, I'm Scott Aaron Rogers. Love each other, Indiana.